Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Google. This is the second in our series of artist lectures at Digital Arts at Google. Thank you very much for coming. This evening, we're very pleased to welcome Scott Draves and Luke DuBois, both of whom have pieces exhibited out in the lobby. I hope you got a chance to see them before the talk. If you didn't, and in any case, they'll be there after the talk as well. Digital Art at Google is a new venture for Google. Google's general mission is to organize all the world's information and make it universally accessible. Art is one way to organize information, and therefore we feel that computational art is a tool that Google should understand and eventually should be using and helping people to use to present information to the world. I'm not going to talk anymore, both because you didn't come here to hear me and because I have a terrible cold. Scott Draves has been doing computational art for about 20 years. He's been displayed at museums and festivals around the world. A lot of his work are examples of massively distributed computational art, including the piece out in the lobby right here. And I won't take up any of your time. Scott.
Thanks, Josh. So I'm just going to switch over to my laptop for a little presentation here. And what I'm going to do is tell you not just about this piece of art, but about a couple of pieces, a couple of different things that I've done over the past 20 years, and to sort of give you an idea of where this came from and maybe hint at where it's going. So it all started back in the 70s when I first encountered computers as a child. And it was love at first sight. I was fascinated and started programming, started teaching myself to programming, and started doing computer graphics, started drawing pictures by writing programs. And that developed through college. I went to Brown University and was in the so-called graphics group with Andy Van Dam, and that was a really rich period in history. Scott Snibbe, who's in the audience somewhere, where'd he go? There he is in the corner, was there. Brian Knepp was there, two other artists doing programming computers to do interesting art these days. That was also a time when I really got into open source software. In particular, I learned the Emacs editor, which is written by Richard Stallman himself, and really became enamored with this philosophy of sharing code and collaboratively in a distributed fashion, sort of improving intellectual products. And so then I went to Carnegie Mellon University to study computer science with people like Andy Witkin and Peter Lee. And I was studying programming languages and something called metaprogramming, which are programs that write programs, or things like compilers, and semantics, which are sort of the meaning of languages or the meaning of statements, and artificial intelligence. And it was during those years, from 90 to 97, I had a lot of rope. My advisors were very generous and supportive of my research and also my artistic pursuits, and that was really when the ball got rolling. And in particular, I had an internship in Tokyo in 1991 that was where I had access to a Silicon Graphics supercomputer all to myself for the whole summer. And so, for a long time I had been working on these graphical algorithms, and I was always constrained or limited by what I could do with my regular PC that I had at home. And suddenly, with this supercomputer, I was sort of freed from the constraints of time. It was sort of like a window into the future, and I was able to really I was free to find the real beauty inside these equations and inside the math. So the first thing, oops, I was talking too long. So the first project that sort of came out of this process that I'm going to show you is called Fuse, and I wrote it out in Japan on that trip, and it's quite different from the artwork I have here in this show because it's based on input images, so it's not abstract. You actually give it a photograph or of a painting or of a scene, and what it does is constructs a mosaic out of that image, and it's a mosaic where the tiles overlap, and what the algorithm does is it does a search, and it searches for the best tiles that sort of fit together in the overlapped portion. So it's a little bit like a puzzle where the computer solves the puzzle, and it's possible to have a target image. And so an example of what this algorithm produced is here. Unfortunately, these projectors are really dark. I don't know, you can barely see it on them. Can you turn the lights down? Does that help? You can also, maybe you can see it a little better on the LCD screens. Behind you, or maybe if I just does turning the brightness up on the screen make any difference? I don't think so. But basically, this is I took a photograph of my face and of my sort of friend and coworker's face, and I fed those two images into this algorithm, and it produced this as the output. And you can see fragments of faces, but it's all sort of scrambled. So locally it makes sense. Locally it looks like a flesh, but globally it doesn't make any sense. So here's another example where I took several pictures of my hand in various configurations and fed it into this algorithm, and it synthesized this sort of fleshapod landscape. And it's also possible, like I said, to give this algorithm a target image. And so in this case, I gave it that same picture of my head, my portrait of me, as the target, and I gave it just my excuse me, just my eye as the input image. And then so it made a picture of my whole head out of just my eye. So this is the result. It's kind of creepy. And so again, these are images from the really early 90s. And sorry, I'm really dying. Josh, can you get me a glass of a bottle of water? I should have had that. And so this algorithm was published as free software, as open source on the web a few years after I wrote it, after the web started to, after I made a web page. And then it was put as a plugin into the GIMP software, which is the open source Photoshop clone. And so it shipped onto millions of desktops all over the world. And the technique actually was then picked up by the sort of traditional computer graphics research community. Thank you. And so this is now known as patch-based texture synthesis, and there are hundreds of research papers and people working on improving this and doing different things with it. So, and you can go to draves.org/fuse to see a whole gallery of images. One thing that I actually did a lot of when I first made this was I used internet pornography as the input images. So a little bit like Mark Napier's Pamela Anderson, I took images of internet women and sort of scrambled them and created abstract art out of them. I'm not going to show those here, but you can find them on the website. So that was so here's another project I did. That was Fuse. So this is Flame. Flame is an open source visual language, and I put the date on it. It's sort of 1991, but it's pretty hazy. That was because it was based on a long series of experiments. It had several antecedents, and then it's been under development since then, so it doesn't really have an end date. But it's the Flame algorithm produces images that are organic and fluid. It's the basis for the electric sheep and the basis for the artwork I have in the show here. What's really different about it compared to, there's a number of open source graphics toolkits that are available these days. What's really different about and they're based on the metaphor of the pen and the object, just like computer graphics sort of has been since its inception, because computer graphics was based on drafting and engineering design, which was done with those objects. And so just like with most new media, the first thing they do is imitate the old media. Just like when movie cameras appeared, the first thing they did was point them at a play and then run the theater and just record it. But the Flame algorithm is really operates by a completely different principle. It's based on solving an equation with thousands of parameters and millions of variables. It takes a long time. And I've actually just completed a documentary about it. So this is it's a 3-minute little video that I'm going to play.
In 1993, when the World Wide Web was new, Scott Draves released the Flame algorithm as open source. This was, quite possibly, the earliest application of the GPL to art. Since then, his code has been copied, expanded, and is still thriving. Every day, people all over the world create flames with no intervention or permission from Draves. As an example, flames have been used recently in works by former Pre-Ars Electronica Prize winners. Loca, a music video by Glenn Marshall, released in 2008. Strange Culture, a movie about Steve Kurtz by Lynn Hirschman Leeson, released in 2007. In fact, one of the very earliest flames, Flame number 149 by Scott Draves, won a Pre-Ars honorary mention in 1993. Now flames are used by commercial artists in films, books, TV and advertising, as well as by thousands of hobbyists. Flame is not an end-user application. It is an algorithm and API, but a departure from the usual graphics APIs, which are based on the metaphors of the pen, geometry, and 3D. Flame images are formed by solving a recursive equation with thousands of parameters and millions of variables. The results are distinctive, recognizable, and extremely diverse. How do designers make Flame images? At first, they used Flame plugins made by other programmers for Photoshop and Adobe After Effects. Flame is on millions of desktops worldwide, having shipped standard with Linux for years in the GIMP. Eventually, more powerful standalone apps appeared, such as Apophysis for Windows in 2004, Oxidizer for Mac in 2006, Cosmic for Linux in 2008, Apo3D in 2009, and the cross-platform Frost in 2009. Following Flame's open-source GPL licensing, these applications are all also GPL. The Electric Sheep is another important design source. It's an easy-to-use open-source screensaver that animates flame designs and creates new flames using a popularity-driven genetic algorithm. All are Creative Commons licensed for remix and reuse. Designs frequently appear in do-it-yourself music videos and VJ performance. Making the decision to open source one's art is a philosophical statement in support of creating a better society, one with more creativity that is more participatory, less prepackaged and broadcast. An artist who makes open source artwork actively relinquishes control, realizing that others may use it for questionable ends. But the artistic rewards Draves has received by sharing the code have been tremendous. It has been vastly expanded by contributions from all over the world and totally rewritten in 2009. Flames have become their own genre, currently ranking 7th in Google under the search term Flames. Scott Draves has spawned an immense loosely joined worldwide community of designers, programmers, and passionate fans. The open sourcing of the Flame algorithm and how our culture has responded to it show how the free flow of information allows an artist to exceed their own boundaries.
So the Flame algorithm is the basis for the electric sheep and the basis for generation 243, which is the piece of our work here in the show. But and it's really the Flame algorithm. It takes hours to render even one single frame of video, and video plays back when you see it animated at 30 frames per second. So on a regular computer, it's a day of work per second. And so this kind of artwork is only possible with thousands of computers, essentially the collective power of the internet, all working together. And the the process. What I'm really interested in is, with something with open source art, is not so much making these specific images, but really allowing other people to make their own images and enabling other people to make their own art, which is kind of the participatory, it's the ultimate form of interaction. But I've also done sort of more traditional interactive art, and interactive art has really become popular in the past, say, 5 years. But it was the BOM was an interactive software artwork that I did in the mid '90s, and it was an interactive visual musical instrument. And what I mean by that is it was something that you could play like a musical instrument, like you would play the piano or the drums or the trumpet, but instead of making sound, it made visuals, and it used the keyboard, the mouse, and audio input, and then it did generative video output. And it was based on a whole bunch of techniques from complex systems theory, in particular cellular automata and reaction diffusion, computed in real time. And it actually included versions of the Fuse algorithm and the Flame algorithm, real-time versions of those as well. So it was just kind of a big toolbox, or which I used for VJ performance. So you want to take this to a show, and it was taking audio input from the DJ or from the band, and then I was using the keyboard and the mouse to sort of to riff off that, and to create a video show which was projected behind the band or behind the DJ. And that's what got me into live performance, I think, back in the mid '90s. So, and actually later on, because this was open source, again, I was able to sort of, things happened to it that I wasn't able to do myself. So in this case, David Ziccarelli, who does the Max MSP program, actually took BOM and ported it into Max MSP so that it was a module inside of that interactive designing environment, which has turned out to be really popular, and I guess Luca is actually involved in developing that system now. So anyway, so people were able to other people were able to perform with this and to create their own music. And so, unfortunately, this software is really old, and actually, I've sort of let it lapse. It doesn't run on modern computers anymore. But I have a clip which I'll play for you. And so this is a music video. It's sort of like a canned VJ performance, and one that I created using that Max MSP system. So remember, this was done on a really, I think, a 486 laptop. So it's a really old PC that you could barely even boot up today. But it was computed in real time. It recomputes every pixel at every frame. So I'm gonna skip through a little bit here just to give you an idea of what this program can do. You can barely see it at all. These projectors are just too dark. I'm sorry. What it's doing right now is it's running reaction diffusion in real time, and reaction diffusion is the algorithm that animals use to create their spots, essentially, like leopard spots and tiger stripes and stuff like that. So what you're sort of seeing is like an animal texture, an animal skin, which is reconfiguring itself in real time. Okay, so that's just a taste of that one. So, and then I got tired. So when I was doing when BOM runs, it has to generate the graphics in real time, which means 30 times per second. You only get 30 milliseconds to create your image, which is a big constraint. And so I got sort of tired of that, and I wanted to do something which was really high quality. So I went back to the Flame algorithm, and this was I was living in San Francisco, and the .com explosion was happening. This was 1999, and so I did the internet distributed version of the Flame algorithm, which was the Electric Sheep. So in the Electric Sheep, the screensavers form a distributed supercomputer. So when you're not using your computer, it goes to work creating art. And the audience votes. Everybody who's watching that screensaver can vote on whether or not they like what they see, and that runs a genetic algorithm. So the artwork is evolving like with Darwinian evolution. So it's this artificial intelligence which is trying to satisfy human desire. And there's also crowdsource in the genetic designers, so that people are uploading completed designs into it, and the human design team collaborates and competes with this AI. And so this project has been running online for about 10 years now. And so it's one of the first sort of crowdsource or collaborative internet artworks and is still going strong and still gaining speed. Right now we have about 350,000 users, monthly uniques. And here I'll show you. You can see what it looks like because it's my screensaver. And it's in the same basic style as Generation 243, but there's a couple of differences. One is that this is really unedited. So there's because it's on the internet and it's responding to the voting public, that means it's like just like democracy, it appeals to the lowest common denominator. And so I call it the Las Vegas problem, which is that things that are like bright and flashy get a lot of votes and reproduce, and then so you end up with a lot of stuff like that, which is not what I think is really truly beautiful. So the other problem with it is, while it's great to have 350,000 people sort of helping you create your art, it really, it sucks to have that many people downloading videos from your website. The server bills are really out of control. So I wanted to, plus it's low resolution, I wanted to increase the quality. So essentially, in order to solve these problems, I started to create limited edition artworks instead of stuff that was just software artwork that's free online. And that's where the Dreams in High Fidelity series came from, and that's where Generation 243 came from, the piece here. And so that was sort of going from the internet sort of to the museum and to the gallery. And the difference, the things that that differentiate it is, for one thing, in order to make Generation 243, what I do is I go through the thousands of things that the screensaver does, and it has hundreds of thousands of sheep have been produced, and I pick out a few of them that satisfy my aesthetic, that I think are truly beautiful, and edit them and assemble them, redo them in high definition and high quality and high bandwidth, sort of beyond the quality that you can do video over the internet, and then turn it into a limited edition piece of art. So something which is collectible and maintainable and has permanence. So the one we have here was commissioned by Carnegie Mellon University and sits in the lobby of their new computer science building. So, there's more on the way. So I think I'm out of time, and maybe we have time for just a question or two.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. You mean how much do I play with pre-existing algorithms in general, or how much is that piece or is that stuff based on pre-existing ones?
In any of the posts, do you ever specifically choose one that has a meaning associated with that algorithm?
Well, the stuff that I've done they're inspired by natural algorithms. For example, the reaction diffusion stuff, and in general, my art intends to cross the line from digital into organic and sort of take things that have natural beauty and recreate their essence in software form. But that's done, it's never done by literally copying or reproducing the algorithms from nature. Which tends to be really hard, and so instead what I do is I find something that has the same effect or captures the essence of, say, leopard spots, even though the actual equation or the actual algorithm is not derived from studying a leopard, for example. It's just, but it does have the same, the same overall properties.
One of the things that's interesting to me about this business of getting from the Vegas effect and then, sort of pulling it back,
Yeah.
From the point of view of a mathematician or a programmer, the elegant solution is the simplest piece of code that'll get you the most complicated phenomena. And at the point at which you're pulling back from the experience of what's on the screen, do you start to bump into that ambition?
Well, I still have the ambition of producing as much variety and as much quality as I can with as little code as I can, and that's definitely sort of part of my aesthetic is, synergy or getting out more than you put in. But yeah, definitely, just maximizing complexity, you end up with, randomness essentially. And so I found that you have definitely I have to turn it back, and that's done just manually by my own hand. I haven't found an algorithm which can encapsulate what I think is beautiful, and I'm not really I'm kind of curious about it, but that's not really my mission. So I mean I enjoy making those decisions. I'm not motivated to automate that aspect of the process.
Disappointed in the Vegas, what were you hoping might come out of such collective endeavor?
Well, I wasn't disappointed. I mean, it's just a fact of life. It's like you can't get angry at gravity. But it does produce a lot of great stuff, and the things it does produce things that I think are truly beautiful. They're not necessarily are usually not the ones that were the winners of the popularity contest, but they are part of the ecosystem which is run by the popularity contest. And so, and I think that's not too different from, our world.
If I may, if you look up the definition of beauty in the dictionary, which I had to do a few months ago, you'll find it says that which appeals to the mind. What is missing in that definition when you use the word beauty?
I mean, it's more than just the mind. I mean, to me, beauty has a visual aspect to it, or a sort of an aesthetic aspect, which is separate from, from some practical or utilitarian purpose. So there's a lot of things that appeal to me for practical reasons that I don't necessarily think are beautiful.
Let's move on.
Okay.
Scott will be around when we're done with our second presentation. So feel free to approach him with questions then. Thank you very much. Our second speaker this evening is Luke DuBois. Luke is a composer, musician, performer, artist, multi-instrumentalist, all-around nice guy. He is also a fairly serious computer scientist in his own right, and he is represented in our...
I would dispute that. Hacker? No, definitely not a hacker.
Okay.
More like a comic computer scientist.
Those are the best ones. He's represented in our exhibit by his work. Hindsight is always 2020, which is a fascinating visualization of presidential inaugural speeches that captures a moment in history in a very interesting way. And thank you.
All right. Thanks, Josh. So I'm going to give you the whirlwind tour of my life in about 30 minutes, including some older work and a couple things that I'm working on now that I haven't quite figured out what they're going to look like or what they're going to be. And I'm going to focus. Like Josh said, I do a lot of things, and I'm going to focus mostly on I guess what you would call my visual art stuff that I do that has some sort of visual output that's meant for viewing outside of the context of performance. But to give you a little bit of background, I started out as a musician. And actually, before I even started out as a musician, I started out as an engineer. at Columbia University, and I basically flunked out of engineering school because I was too busy being a musician. And I was working at a place called the Computer Music Center up at Columbia, where I was restoring and performing music on all these old analog synthesizers from the 60s and 70s. They look like phone switchboards. And I put a band together in the 90s called the Freight Elevator Quartet. This is us at the Kitchen in 1999. And there were 4 of us. We had a cellist and a didgeridoo player and a guy with a bunch of drum machines, and I used to play these old synthesizers. And as you can see, if you sort of focus on this bit of the image and ignore everything else, we're really boring to watch. This is the conclusion that we drew after much consideration. And that was because, well, it was for a few reasons. But I would argue a big chunk of what made us not that interesting to watch was that we were engrossed in a lot of fairly obtuse technology on stage that didn't really have a lot of, I guess what people who are smarter than me call performative agency. But that's just a fancy way of saying it. When I do something on stage, you can't tell what I'm doing and how it affects whatever you're experiencing. And so, you know, the easiest way to do this is to compare, for example, the cellist and myself. It's me with a laptop computer. You know, when a cellist plays a note, you kind of know what's happening, right? You can expect that there's a physical motion with an acoustic effect. Whereas me, I could be checking my email. I wasn't, I don't think, but I've done that before. I've absolutely checked my email from stage, and you know, if anybody who performs on stage with a laptop and they say they've never done that, they're lying, right? So that's, you know, that's just the way it is, and that's okay. But a lot of what this early stuff I was doing was trying to grapple with a couple problems. One was the idea of having a computer on stage, and it's not that a computer is technology. So this is actually an important sort of thread in some of the ideas that I have spinning around in my head at all times. It's not that this is the first use of technology on stage. Music is technology. Unless you are singing unamplified in a forest, and the music you're singing is something you made up in your head that morning, you're using technology, right? If you're singing something that was ever notated, you're using literacy. If you're singing in a space, you're using architecture. If you're playing an instrument, that's technology. If it's amplified, that's definitely technology, right? If it's amplified and produced on a record that someone plays later, that's definitely technology, right? So this is just one more step in the equation, and to say that this is substantively different is actually, to a certain degree, a moral panic, right? It's sort of, actually it's not, right? And when we talk about information art, which I'll show you a few things while I'm showing things on the computer, that's another kind of thing that is interesting, the idea that information art sort of might have a start point sometime in the 1970s, when I would argue that, you know, we've had information art for millions and millions of years. We just call it music, right? Music is the sonification of data for all intents and purposes. It's a bunch of instructions being laid out in time and affected or evoked in a performance. So I was trying to figure out how to make us look more fun. Back to the point. And I started performing and writing a lot of music that involved imagery. And so this is an early example. This is a piece from 2003. This is a piece for guitar. It should be obvious at this point that I do not have quite the sophisticated visual sensibility of Scott. This is called Turtle Graphics. I don't know if you guys remember this. But this is for a guitarist, a guy named Dominic Frasca, and the different notes on the computer, the different notes that he plays are telling the computer to do different drawing actions. Draw forward, turn left, turn right. And if he plays it perfectly, he gets a plant. Right? And if he screws up, he gets a different plant. That's called a mutation. That's how we got here. It's not a big deal. Right? And so you can hear there's a sort of riff, recurring riff. There's a melody that comes through. That melody is the graphical primitive of this plant. Okay, it's the instruction set for drawing a little branch and going back and moving along the original path. Happens like 8,000 times in this piece, right? And the whole idea of this was that I was trying to deal with the issue of sort of music and modern music, and particularly modern music that has an algorithmic basis to it, which is increasingly common, where instead of sitting at the piano and writing things that sound beautiful, you actually concede part of the compositional process to an algorithm, to a piece of math, right? And how do you make that transparent to the audience? How do you make the system at play actually make sense to someone who's listening to it, so that it doesn't just sound like noise? Well, one idea is to use systems that have a linguistic apparatus to it, which is what these algorithms, are called Lindenmayer systems, sort of do. They can be broken down into hierarchies of structure, which is how language works and is how we listen to music. And so I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about that as a useful and kind of fun way to grapple with making sense of information, which is to transcode it, to stick it in a medium you don't usually experience it. Just to give you a couple quickie examples from the repertoire, this is another performance algorithm that I use once in a while. And of course it's not working. Hello. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it is working. This is, these guys are listening to me, right? Right? They're listening to me. And they're visualizing my voice. And this is something that I traditionally would do in a performance situation with a friend of mine, a guy named Todd Reynolds, who's a really amazing, incredible violinist. And the conceit of it is you have these four birds flocking around, and what they're trying desperately to do is detect my rhythm and spin and canon based on the rhythms that I'm playing. I'm just talking to you, so it's not quite working. But it gives you an idea of the idea that you can visualize a sound in an interesting and kind of kinetic way. You can also go the other way, and so this is just to give you a little example of this. While I was working on all this music, I helped write a totally wacky programming language called Jitter, which is what this is. I'm going to talk into the computer for a second. My dog has fleas. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's see what that looks like. That should be it. Testing 1, 2, 3. There you go. So this is a sonogram. My dog has fleas. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you all see that? This is like a pretty standard way to turn a sound into a picture. All right. The red line's time, and the left to right is the frequencies, and the height is sort of how loud a frequency is at that point in time. Does that make sense to you guys? Right. This is a pretty normal way to. Dog has fleas. Testing 1, 2, 3. So the dirty little secret here, though, is the sound you're hearing. My dog has fleas. Testing 1 is being scanned off the image. It didn't actually record my sound. It just turned it into a picture. And now it's playing back the picture. And so you can do these things that you're not supposed to be able to do with sound. For example, there is absolutely no reason why the red line has to move. My dog has... I can each time. Has fleas. Or make it run kind of slow. Or backwards. There you go. Or make it run really fast. Right? But like really, really fast. Turn it into an oscillator. Right? You do that. Or you can say, you know what? It's a picture. What the hell? I just blur it. Right? Then when you turn that back to normal speed. Right? You blur pictures all the time. Why don't you blur sound? That's what you get. So I started thinking that was pretty cool. The idea that one of the neat tricks about turning a sound into an image is that you could essentially divorce it from time. And so I started thinking to myself, well, what kind of things would I want to do with that? The idea that the red line can move at any speed, and also that you can blur things. You can basically create almost sort of long exposure photographs of sound. And I got into this whole riff on this technique, which I started calling time-lapse phonography. And I started thinking of like things to put through it. So here's all the Billboard #1 songs, sped up to 1 second for every week they're at #1. And so you got in 37 minutes the entire history of the pop chart. Right, done as a sequence of drones. Right, and some of these drones are interesting, right? Like, or some things about the drones are interesting, right? So like all of 1978's in the key of F, right? All the Bee Gees songs, right? If you listen to this stuff, right, you have you discover pretty quickly that you have part of this memorized, right? If you grew up listening to pop music, you see it sort of going by, and you're like, oh my God, I remember that song, or oh, I hated that song, or I lost my virginity right there, or you have the whole thing like in your brain, right? And I started thinking about it as an aspect of our culture that we are kind of obsessed with lists. And the idea of top lists or number one lists. And so I started making a bunch of pieces around it. So along with Billboard, I did this. This is every Academy Award Best Picture sped up to 1 minute. Right? So this is 76 movies in 76 minutes. This is Wings. Let me find you something y'all might recognize. I was going with the wind. That was Casablanca. Right? That was Casablanca. The entire movie's in there. It's an average. Okay, it's not skipping through the film. Right? It's a weighted average. Musical, really beautiful, actually. Let's see if I can find a good musical. Let's see if I can find like West Side Story or something. Oh, you guys get the idea. But I'm too late now. We gotta go back a little. Yeah. So the entire, there we go. That's so we got entire films in a minute, no matter how long. And then to round out I made a piece where I took all the Playboy Playmates of the month and centered their eyes. So this is 50 years of Playboy in 50 seconds. All right, so this is time-lapse pornography, right? And so I started thinking to myself, well, you know what? Like, we got these lists, and they're important to us, but we don't necessarily think about like how they got to be those lists, right? It's a little bit like trying to actually debug how a search engine might work. Like, how did number one songs become number one songs? But to have a number one song, you need the collusion of several major multinational corporations, right? To get a Academy Award Best Picture, the people who vote for the Academy Awards are the people who are themselves eligible to win at the Academy Awards, right? We did not vote for West Side Story, right? It's a peer review. That's why they thank the Academy, right? And don't even get me started on Playboy. But you get the idea, right? We did not select these things, right? We live in a democratic society in which the most valuable cultural objects in our society were not democratically selected, right? So maybe that's kind of interesting. So I started thinking about that. And I started thinking about other kinds of data sets that you could subject to that kind of analysis. And I'll show you just briefly the piece that's on the wall around the corner. I was commissioned by the Democratic National Convention to make a piece in 2008, and I made a piece called "Hindsight is Always 2020." And I knew I was going to make a thing about presidential speeches, presidential rhetoric, something like that. And I started out thinking I was going to do something kind of like a Billboard pop chart, like 100 most common phrases or something like that. So like George Washington, the State of the Union is sound or whatever. And then I saw James Carville on CNN, and he was on some rant. He was talking about vision. And he's saying, well, he was talking about the Bush administration. This is back in like 2006. He's saying, well, the problem is they don't have vision today. I started thinking to myself, how do you judge your leaders? You judge your leaders based on their vision. So how do you test vision? You make eye charts. So I decided to make a bunch of eye charts. One for every president of the United States. These are the words of their State of the Union addresses, most common, the least common word. So George Washington, his most common word is gentleman. George Bush's terror. Right? Some of these you can guess, right? Ronald Reagan is deficits. Richard Nixon, interestingly, is truly, right? Some of these you can probably figure out, like Abraham Lincoln is emancipation, right? Something like FDR. FDR is democratic, right? Herbert Hoover is unemployment. Right? Calvin Coolidge is talking about veterans, and this is the last time New Orleans flooded, right? And so what do you do with this? Well, what you do is you make yourself 43 2-scale massive light boxes that actually work as eye charts. If you stand 20 feet back and you can read between those lines, you have 20/20 vision. You install them outside the Pepsi Center in Denver, Colorado during the Democratic National Convention. Lots of people walk by. It's very fun. And you also make some prints. These are prints that we made that were shown at the Weissman Art Museum in Minneapolis during the Republican Convention. And they've been sort of touring around. And I thought they were kind of interesting. This is at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. This was where this was during the actual election in 2008. And what's interesting about them is they give you this really interesting insight into presidential rhetoric of any given time period. And the idea behind the piece was that the State of the Union address is a piece of political theater. All right, it's a constitutionally mandated piece of political theater. It's actually required by law, right? The president has to come and do his homework. And what it is it's about a sovereignty relationship. It's about how Congress is sovereign over the president. Right? The president has to report to Congress, not the other way around. The king cannot dissolve Parliament in this country. Parliament can impeach the king, right? So that's an important power relationship that's embodied in this event. And at the time I was working on this, we were living in what will arguably, in hindsight, be felt was an imperial presidency. So I wanted to do a big piece about how Nancy Pelosi was really George Bush's boss, and how we had forgotten about that. At the same time, so let me just show you a few other little bits and pieces. At the same time I was wrapping up, at the same time I was doing pre-production on Hindsight, I was wrapping up a film project that was a collaboration with my dear friend who's a performance artist, Leon Amherst, who's in our audience. And it's a kooky collaboration. It's a 3-day-long performance. They're scripted and directed and executed by Leon. But then I filmed, right? Just sort of documented panoptically, like kind of in as ridiculously obsessed a way as humanly possible. Got all these hard drives, and then I took the film and accelerated it. So it's a 72-hour performance set on a traffic island off the coast of Union Square. Right? We set up a boudoir. And she spends 3 whole days out there getting ready for a night out in the town, doing all the things that one would do in such a situation. And then I speed the whole thing up to 60 speed. So in experiencing the film, you get a very different sense of the performance. So it's not a document of the performance. It's sort of more a reaction piece to the performance, where it sort of, in a weird way, looks like she's moving normally and everything else is flying by. And then you score it to a violin concerto in 7 movements that are all about different types and stages of obsessive love. Making this up about time and relationships. And it's funny, like, I don't really think about what I do is information art per se, but this is maybe a different spin on it. So instead of looking at lists of things and doing a bunch of math, you can also be a lot more lyrical with it and just say, I want to do a thing on the subject of how you look at someone when you love them and how that works and what that shot list might be, right? And what those different phases are. And then you can just sort of construct something out of it. So a couple things that I've got kicking around on my computer these days. Let me just show you one last thing. I'm working on kind of a monster of a piece. It's also about love, sort of. I decided to make my own census. It's a census year. It's 2008, right? So I decided to make my own census. So what I did was I joined 21 different online dating sites as a straight man, a gay man, a straight woman, and a gay woman, and downloaded everybody. So I downloaded 16.7 million Americans to a hard drive and sorted them by congressional district. So I can tell you how many people in your district are shy and how many people are looking for someone who's fun. Here, I'll show you. For example, there you go. Here you go. Here's some math. Here are all the people. Here are all the shy people in the United States. If you're purple, that means you're more shy. If you're green, that means you're less shy. So red is shy women. Blue is shy men. Okay. Here are all the lonely people. Right. White means a lonelier district. Right. Here are where people say they're sexy. So sexy really only shows up in a few places. It's actually pretty interesting. It sort of shows up on the coast. And here's where people say they're funny, men versus women. If you're the white areas are the least funny parts of America. There you go, right there. It's the least funny part of America, right there. So I'm preparing a whole bunch of maps, and I'm preparing a census document that I think actually is vital to our national security. because what it allows you to do is it allows you to prepare maps and other documenta. So this is a sort of thing of these are all the single people in New York, right, with their eyes centered. But it allows you to prepare a pretty substantive case for critiquing or debunking the census as it exists now as a snapshot of us as Americans, right? Saying that what we should really be paying attention to is median household income, and how many of us are in manufacturing sector jobs, and how many of us are in service industry jobs, and how many of us have changed jobs. So we do this, and we make these chloropleth maps. So it's kind of white to black maps about that stuff, and they have meetings on it, and then policy is actually affected on this. So what if instead of that we did red state, blue state maps based on type A, type B personality, right? Or what would happen if I told you that rather than median household income, we just sort of looked instead at how many people are lonely at night and where those people are, right? Or we looked at just to make it a little bit more funny, like I joined 21 sites. I joined a lot of alternative lifestyle sites. So I can tell you for a fact that men in the eastern half of Long Island are way more interested in being spanked than men in the western half of Long Island, right? Right. I think Congress needs to know this information. I think this is important. This is important stuff. So this is my current. If you haven't figured out yet that I have obsessive compulsive disorder, you weren't paying attention. But that's sort of the idea, is to make this body of work around that, and it's called A More Perfect Union, and I'll be showing it sometime in January. We good? Is that about right? Did I come in around time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Thanks.
Nobody has any questions after that. I'll be disappointed.
Ask me a question. Anybody?
How long does it take to do one of those compilations?
Which compilations?
For instance, the movie one.
Oh, geez, that took a long time. I was actually really lucky because I did that piece right before all the video rental stores closed. Right, when there were still 3 Kims, and there was still the movie place in the Upper West Side and stuff. So I was really lucky because I didn't have to, actually I could run around town and go into movie stores and be like, "Do you have Grand Hotel?" And they would be like, "Sure," and I was able to acquire all the movies, and then I had a render farm, a lab of computers at work where I was able to crunch them. So that took about 4 months, 4 or 5 months. Yeah, it took about 16 hours a movie. But that was a while ago. Now it wouldn't take that long. But yeah, some of the things that I do. The census I've been working on for about 2 years. So it's it takes a while to crunch all that stuff. Sir.
Just curious, if you seem to have all the lines, the eyes aligned.
Uh-huh.
Do it just for lines on both sides of the face. It seems very labor.
Yeah, it's a drag. Yeah. I mean, you can automate some of that, right?
That's the question.
Yeah, you can automate some of that. Your head is most people said within 10% is 5 by 7, and that unit's the width of your eye, right? So if you can find a face, you can center eyes, you can train things to do that. Problem is in online dating profiles, people get a little arty with their photographs, and so it's a little bit harder. It's much easier to do oh my God, what's his name? Jason Salavan, digital artist in Chicago, has a lot of pieces with things like graduation photographs where he does that, right? That's much easier to do because there's a sort of guaranteed neutral background, right? So that's a sort of automatable thing, maybe. It's a little bit harder to do with this. So I've been spending a lot of time clicking on them. I'm working on a computer vision piece right now that is all about trying to automate things, which is I've been making a bunch of pop icons. So what I did was I trained the computer with 1,000 paparazzi photos of Britney Spears, and then just run all her music videos through, and it can lock her eyes. So this is an automated process. It's finding her eyes. But that's not super duper easy to do. Yeah. So what else?
How about the presidential speeches? How long did it take you to figure all that?
That wasn't so bad because all those speeches are a matter of public record. So you just have to find them, and there's a wonderful place at UC Santa Barbara called the American Presidency Project. It's part of the political science department, where they've been taking basically the entire paper trail of the American presidency, every speech, every bill they signed, every judge they appointed, every whatever, and sticking it into a huge database for researchers. They've been doing it for about 10 years. And so they have a pretty definitive set of tools and access points if you're doing research on the presidency, where they have a whole, like, it's called a MySQL database. They have one of those things where you can just get time on the thing and look for stuff and do word searches. And that's how I made these, was I basically unilaterally announced myself as their first artist in residence without them knowing what the heck that meant. And just sort of invited myself to use their database. And they were like, sure, that's fine. You know, so that's where that came from. You know, so that wasn't super bad. The biggest part of that was coming up with the look and coming up with the algorithm by which I was trying to get at the right words. Because actually all the words in the eye charts are unique. So not only is it like the top 66 words for every president, but it's also, if a president has that word in their chart, that means it's not in any of the other charts. It cancels, right? So George Washington is gentleman. That means not only did he say gentleman the most, that means he also said gentleman more than any other president, right? So George Bush is terror. That means not only did he say the terror the most, hermetically within his own speeches, but he used that word more than anyone else. So it's gone from their charts. So up comes the rest. And then, so you end up with these very, very specific historical references to different times, to different things. Yeah. It's like a tag cloud from hell. But yeah. Yeah. What else? John.
Luke, so has your personal sense of time gotten elastic somehow over the years? You know, you hear...
Oh, geez. That, you know, I mean, given what I used to do to my body in high school, I don't think this matters, you know. But it's like, you know, I don't know, maybe. I definitely have started taking the long view of how we deal with technology in our culture and how we deal with information in our culture. Like, I think one interesting little thing, I had this huge writer's block moment a couple of weeks ago. I was trying to make a blog entry for the Guggenheim, for that YouTube play thing they're doing, that video art biennial that they're doing with between the Guggenheim and YouTube. They asked me to be a blogger for it, and I was trying to come up with some introductory post, and I was having one of these like crisis of like, you know, online publishing video art, and I sort of came up with the idea that, you know, or just it was, I started thinking like, you know, okay, so computer programming, right? Like 1,000 years from now, everybody's going to program computers. It's just going to be life. That's just the way it is. It's going to be normal. Right? Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's going to be normal, right? 1,000 years from now, everybody is going to publish their work online, right? Right. So it's the you know, it's the Warhol deconstruction. Instead of everybody being famous for 15 minutes, everybody's going to be famous for 15 people, right? That's just the way it's going to be, right? And so looking at this particular slice of time in our world and sort of doing things like bemoaning the collapse of the record industry. So the record industry will just be a historical 50-year blip in the radar. The idea that people should make money off their records in the grand scheme of human civilization is going to seem so like random and pointless, right? Once we're 1,000 years out, you know, or what have you. So I have started like kind of rustling up some ideas about that, but my own experience of time is that I never have enough of it, and that's been true. That's been true for a very long time. Yeah. What else? Folks.
Is that why you speak so fast?
No, I speak really fast because I'm always, well, yeah, actually, that might be why I speak fast. I also have this terrible accent. I'm from Hoboken, New Jersey, so I don't have a particularly palatable accent. So I guess if I rush through things, that's the best way to get it over with. So you can listen to somebody who has a better command of spoken English. But yeah, that might be why. What else, guys? Sir, Kurt. Oh my God, huh? How are you?
It's clear that you make decisions showing up.
Yeah.
But isn't it possible that there are actually advertisers or social networks that are actually doing things that do not?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I had a meeting with somebody a couple weeks ago who seemed extremely interested in the fact that I made some wacky algorithm to sift all that stuff, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole body of sort of computational research right now in everything from targeted advertising to whatnot that's about trying to make sense of things like that, of online dating profiles and whatever. I mean, my piece isn't really so much about that. My piece is more about like the census, like the actual like formal U.S. census that we do and what's wrong with it and how we can like sort of play around with it, than about the fact that I'm quite honestly, I'm violating the privacy of 20% of the adult population in the United States by downloading and crunching this data, right? I've committed 16.7 million accounts of wire fraud, right? You're not allowed to download online dating profiles, right, and use them for anything other than entertainment, right? So, but everybody does it, right? I'm sure there's someone at Nielsen right now who's doing it. I'm sure there's probably someone at your company who does it. There's people all over the place who do it. It's just out there, right? So the thing is just to make something interesting out of it and try to make some sense out of, just coming up with something that is thought-provoking. I try to, if possible, to under-editorialize in what I do. So like the eye charts, there wasn't a partisan piece. That was just the way the math turned out, right? And so I showed it at both the Democratic and the Republican National Convention. And I spoke to a lot of people on sort of both sides of the political line during that election cycle. And, when you show them George Bush's eye chart and begins with terror, someone on the political left in this country will see that as a sort of self-evident damnation of that administration, whereas people on the right of the political spectrum will be like, yeah, damn right, of course it's terror, right? So, so it's not like I have to point that out to you or anything like that. It just is. And, people can draw their own conclusions, I think. So I don't know. What else?
Is there a last question?
Just want to go back to the privacy/legal aspects of your last project, like your endpoint.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine to have like aggregate results of like how many shy people there are in
Sure.
California or whatever.
Sure.
But you're sitting on a database of like 18 million people, and how cool is that?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. This, a map of shyness is not illegal.
Right, the aggregates are fine.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
You're in possession of.
Right. It's the fact that I own a hard drive.
Yes.
That's maybe a problem. That's maybe problematic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I should clarify that. Yeah, this is no big deal. Once you get to from point A to point Z, the final piece, right, won't be that way. The problem is that I've got all this stuff. But I'll throw out all this stuff. I mean, I did this, and I haven't honestly even read most of the profiles. That would take a while. Although I did do this sanity check where I went through to try to get rid of duplicates, and I found one person who was also on all of them. Right? I found another faker. It's like Helena Bonham Carter in Fight Club. So I wrote to her and I was like, J'accuse, and she turned out to be a pop singer. A singer-songwriter in Oakland, California, who was doing a whole album where the lyrics were from online dating sites, right? So I asked her out, right? I was like, oh, we should go out on a date. So I flew to Berkeley, actually on election day weekend. This was like this whole wacky whatever. It was like 2 years ago on election day weekend, and we went for coffee in Berkeley and hung out, and we made up this whole. We didn't hit it off, but we made up this whole like awesome like lie we were going to tell to all our friends that we had this whirlwind romance, but we never. We never actually bothered lying to everybody about it. But it was, but she was also on all of them,
And you actually
plundering.
met through an online dating
And we
service.
met through 16 out of the 21 online dating services simultaneously. Yeah. So that was, that's pretty good. But yeah. So
this is a massively inefficient way to meet girls.
Yeah, I would argue this is an incredibly inefficient way to meet girls. But yeah, although that's one of the things that I always think is interesting about online dating, right? Is it's this totally bizarre act of self-identity where you simultaneously have to put your best foot forward, so you have to lie, And at the same time, you have to say who you want to be with, which means you have to be as incredibly truthful as possible to get what you want, right? So it's a split personality exercise, right? So it's an interesting prose assignment to have to go through, writing an online dating profile. I did not bother to write any. I just wrote some snarky little thing. But the actual ones I've read are actually, they're really interesting. How people have to construct these narratives of who they are and who they want and how that works. And so that's what I'm trying to tear apart and get to in the census. So it'll be kind of fun.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, man. Thanks. All righty.
We have a little bit of time left. Please feel free to have a look at the exhibit, chat with the artist. Thank you very much for coming.